I've I'm reading Many Lifetimes by Joan Grant and Denis Kelsey. It's a study into reincarnation, and the first chapter is called Our Memory, and it's written by Joan Grant. And I read two parts of it already, and I am now in part three of this first chapter. She learned to love her little blue Thayan hippopotamus that was a toy of a little princess. Anyway, we are continuing here. The children at Belvedere were also the impetus which caused me to recall legends from North American reincarnations, which must have been in the second millennium BC, if, as I think, it was after Sikita and before Ra-Up-Hotep. These legends became Redskin Morning. The autobiography was called Scarlet Feather. Although I was then female, I gained the right to wear a feather of this color through undergoing the ordeals required of the tribal warriors. This life was primarily concerned with the need for men and women to resolve their conventional antagonism by recognizing that they had gained their experience in both female and male bodies. The total self is androgen, and if a personality tries to deny the instinct and intuition which were acquired while incarnate as the opposite sex, this will result in a psychological civil war, which will limit the potentialities of the individual and probably lead him or her into the social difficulties which nowadays exasperate the problem of sexual anomaly. The ethics of the tribe to which I belonged were condensed into a single concept. They believed that there was only one question which they would be asked by the great hunters before they could enter heaven. How many people are happier because you were born? This explicit simplicity showed that they had retained an insight into the fundamental principles of individual evolution, which was closer to the original pattern, even than that still held in early Egypt, where the same ideas were already becoming blurred through being more elaborately expressed as the laws of the 42 assessors. Laws which, in another few centuries, became the wisps of reality, obscured by superstition, which have survived in innumerable copies of the Book of the Dead. During this period, I was lucky if I could spare a couple of hours a day for far memory recordings, which, because Charles was occupied with his own writing and research, I usually dictated to Kathleen Barker. After Arthur was taken prisoner at the fall of Hong Kong, Kathleen had come to live at Triple with their three sons. Both she and I were busy with more immediate demands on our time, for there were seldom less than 10 and sometimes 20 other people sharing our roof. Some of these we had known before they arrived, others became friends after landing unexpectedly on the doorstep. Many of them needed only sleep, food, and warmth to renew their energies for another round of the conflict. Others came because a problem which might never have come into their normal waking consciousness under ordinary conditions had become urgent through war strain. It required high speed psychotherapy, which often involved tuning in to the source of a specific fear, which, because they had not realized it belonged to their past, they had presumed to be a premonition of their future. It was very rewarding to find that when the real origin of an acute apprehension of a particular type of death or injury, for instance, drowning, burning, being crushed under falling masonry, or disemboweled, had been seen by me and recognized as valid by the person who suffered from it. The fear dispersed, and thereafter was no more than a normal dislike of this particular hazard. Apart from the chores which occur when running a fairly large household, chores that in wartime extended to such items as converting an enormous dead pig into hams, bacon, sausages, a bladder of lard, and other edible commodities, including three basins of brawn from every morsel of its head, which entailed tweaking the hairs out of its ears with my eyebrow tweezers. There was plenty of nursing. Luckily, I had already had considerable practice in this art, for ever since I first married and had a home instead of living under the parental roof, there were nearly always people in it who were convalescing from operations or accidents or being cosseted through ailments ranging from pneumonia to DTs. I've always been fortunate in having sympathetic friends among doctors, so there was never any difficulty in getting expert medical assistance for the physical problems of the people I was trying to help. In fact, there were several occasions when my insistence on a thorough medical checkup revealed that the real cause of a symptom, for which the patient had been undergoing psychoanalysis for months or even years, was a massive uterine fibroid rather than fertility, or adenoids rather than asthma caused by maternal rejection. It seemed obvious even during my adolescence, as it still does, that any divergence from the natural pattern of health or sanity should be dealt with on the level which is most appropriate. In my view, it would be as idiotic to try to remove a bullet with psychotherapy as it is to expect to cure a neurosis by numbing the patients with pills. My unconventional approach to psychotherapy has always seemed as natural as second sight or far memory. I presume this stemmed from Egyptian incarnations until in 1945 I began to record Return to Elysium. I was born in Greece towards the end of the second century BC. My name was Lucina, and I was the ward and pupil of a philosopher who, on his estate near Athens, tried to cure patients by convincing them that sanity consisted in accepting that they had no hope of immortality. Lucina had retained sufficient far memory to know that this was nonsense, and eventually, after undergoing many scientific tests, was able to convince her guardian, to whom she was devoted, there was a fundamental flaw in his cherished premise. Instead of being glad of this insight, he became distraught. So Lucina went to Rome and established a flourishing, if somewhat discreditable, practice on an island in the Tiber. For various reasons which are not relevant to the subject of reincarnation, I published only one other far memory autobiography. So Moses was born, when I was male, contemporary of Rameses II, and until I met Denis in 1958, I had little opportunity to make further practical use of my conviction that in the expanding universe, the individual also expands. So this was the end of chapter one. Chapter two, recognition of a reality, is written by Denis Kelsey, and I'll read that another time. Hmm.